All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So, hi, local colleagues. Beautiful day in California, at least where I'm at here in Carpinteria, California. The California Climate and Energy Collaborative is so happy to welcome you back. This is now our 6th meeting of our Local Energy Resource Network series, our monthly series. We call it LERN. Because we're here to learn together. And we are so fortunate today to be joined by 2 representatives from the Strategic Growth Council, who I'll introduce in a moment. I just wanted to start off, on maybe a slightly somber note, but I just want to recognize, and since we met last time, there's obviously more reasons for a little bit of global tension and grief with the war. And I just wanted to tell you all how appreciative, how grateful I am to come together with folks like you, spending my time with local climate energy collaborative or local energy and climate colleagues like you that are doing the work to move us into clean energy sources off oil and gas. And your work is so important in so many ways. And thank you for all you're doing. So as always, we would love if you would turn on your webcam, and if you're comfortable doing so, also introduce yourself over chat. This is intended to be an interactive roundtable amongst peers. Okay, so let's go ahead and just remind ourselves what we're here to do together today. I'll start with my own introduction. I'm Angie Hacker, SEEK Statewide Best Practices Coordinator. I'm joined today by other members of the SEEK team, Ryan and Gabby, and they're going to say hi over chat, and you can always contact them if you're having any issues, technical issues. So this is the 6th time we've come together for this 1-hour regular interactive meeting. It's a space for local governments and those that work with them to come together and dive in on all these programs and opportunities and help you advance your energy and climate goals. So while you're out there doing the work, we are tracking a lot of these opportunities, and you can come here and get briefed on the latest and most applicable opportunities. So we're trying to this year really give you a chance to even see, in a crystal ball, look ahead a little bit of even a solicitation coming out, so you know what's coming. And today is another good example of doing that. We have a great opportunity to talk to the Strategic Growth Council's Transformative Climate Communities program, which literally is launching today, the 4th round. And so we're going to have a conversation with them in just a moment. But of course, like always, we go through our opportunity roundtable and we'll do a spotlight. And so once we do that, then we'll wrap up with the BPC, what we're calling now a BPC workshop. We've changed things around a little because you guys gave us really good feedback at our last meeting. And it's going to be more of a peer a discussion about how we share knowledge amongst peers. So we'll get there, and that'll be towards the end of the meeting. As always, don't stress out about taking notes. We will be posting links in the chat to all the resources we talk about, and then we follow up with an email with all the resource links and information and slides. And this is also being recorded, so you'll have that as well, because we do move fast. All right, so let's do it. Let's go to the next slide, Opportunity Roundtable. So this is where we all have a chance to share. So I usually I do a lot of the talking, but while I do, please feel free to add to the chat anything that you think your fellow local and climate energy practitioners would benefit from knowing about. And that could be funding, it could be training, it could be lots of other forms of assistance, any opportunities that local governments and their partners have for important input. So please add that to the chat. It's great to help us learn a little bit more about what's going on. Sometimes you know about it more before we do. So on the right there, we're sort of tracking things from all the way from the evolution of a policy through when a solicitation drops for grants. And I'm so excited about the infrastructure law. And last time we talked about there being a White House guide. What I also wanted to tell you is that I have now access to, it's sort of an informal spreadsheet, but it was developed by a colleague, actually at the federal level, that breaks down everything that's in the infrastructure law in a spreadsheet that's filterable by types of programs. And it's really helpful. So if you're trying to look in your own crystal ball to really understand what's coming, and you're looking for something specific like EV and clean power and microgrids, if you want to see what's coming, that spreadsheet is something that might help you. I don't know if, it's not something I built, but I wanted to pass it along. And so I just thought it could be a good resource for those of you who really want to see what's coming from that investment. And so that link will be shared in the chat as well, the spreadsheet link. And then, just a little update here on Build Back Better. I think you all know it's still sort of has been stalled out. But what I'm hearing, and the latest I'm hearing, is that it's getting repackaged. A lot of those climate and energy provisions are getting repackaged and perhaps in reconciliation. So looks like the Democrats in Congress are working that out right now, and you're starting to see messaging changing. So it might be tied back into an effort to address inflation, energy costs, and global energy supply price volatility. So you're starting to see the impact of what's going on in Ukraine and some of those risks, and really just addressing some of those. So it's interesting. It's interesting what's happening to the climate and energy provisions, and hopefully we'll see more investments coming. Okay, so now to the more specific opportunities. We have talked several times about the CEC's Rural Electric Vehicle Program. It's so close to being due. It's due in 3 days. So if you need more information about it, we did talk about it in the 4th LERN meeting. But if you're applying for it, hopefully you're already very far along in the process. I also want to mention we're not going to do a lot of detail on transformative climate communities because we have folks here to talk about it today. But again, the NOFA is now launching today, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Another new opportunity that we've been asked to pass around is from ICLEI. So ICLEI USA is accepting expressions of interest from nonprofit and civil society organizations or consortiums of organizations that have a plan to accelerate the implementation of a city climate action plan while addressing inequality. So I think they're looking for 2 awardees that will receive $1 million. So there's more details available. It's to be in partnership with local government, but not necessarily for local government directly. Okay. And then coming soon, there's been a little change. So last time, if you were here, last meeting, we talked about the SURF program, Community Economic Resilience Program. And since we talked, there has been a shift in the funding source for that program, which has forced them to kind of go back and do a little bit more groundwork on the guidelines. So the guidelines have to go back to public comment. And all that means is that the expectation for a NOFA for that program is now expected to happen a little later in May or June of this year. And so you can look out for another opportunity if you'd like more input on that program in April. And then the Regional Climate Collaborative, we've been talking about this program a lot too. There is opportunity for input. So we're still expecting to see a NOFA for that program happening out in spring, but there is an opportunity for your comment on the Regional Climate Collaborative draft guidelines, and that's actually due in 2 days. And so we'll drop a link to that as well. We were hoping if anybody wanted to work with us to drop any of your comments through the SEEK program, that we would be interested in compiling that. And I'm going to go ahead and resend out the article we sent out on that opportunity, as long with what we were trying to give you more of a heads up on the Transformative Climate Communities program. So we'll reshare that link in the chat if you do want to work with us on compiling comments, but we're running low on time. You have every opportunity to do that directly, and we hope that you are. A couple of other assistance opportunities. I have to say I'm so excited that folks are starting to reach out to us, coming to these meetings and then saying, hey, like we have this thing and we want to make sure other local partners are aware of it. And so we have heard from the Building Decarbonization Coalition that they are now offering the Switches On program. And so that is a collaborative campaign to support home electrification. It provides tools, support, and resources for Californians. So really it was the Building Decarbonization Coalition was selected in 2021 as part of a winning team to support the Tech Clean California program. And that's a statewide initiative accelerating the adoption of clean space and water heating technology across California. So they want to make sure you're aware of it. And we could bring them actually here to talk more about it. But what I wanted to make sure you're aware of is that this is something that local governments can leverage and promote in their communities to support decarbonization and electrification efforts in your community. It's not something you have to do yourself. It's meant to, if local governments want to help promote it and do outreach and education in their own community, it's ready to go, and they'd be very happy to have your partnership in doing so. The next slide, we're actually going to go into a little bit more detail about the kind of the cousin program of the tech program, which was sort of designed, went through a proceeding at the same time at the CPC. It's called BUILD. So we'll talk about that in just a second. The other thing that came our way was from the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative. It's their energy education hub, and they wanted to make sure that folks across the state were aware of it especially folks in the San Diego region, but they say that their resources is actually something that local governments and their partners could benefit from. And so they quickly connect local jurisdictions with opportunities to implement successful practices and achieve climate action goals. And so they have a living database, provides direct access to energy-related resources and educational materials that pertain to current and future energy codes and standards, compliance, performance improvement, reach code data, net zero energy initiatives, and more. So all those links should be making their way into the chat. And then another note here, we've been talking about the Reach Code Newcomers webinar series. That's still going. We've had 2 so far. There'll be a 3rd, and that will be on March 22nd. And it's not too late to register. And it's actually going really well. We have a lot of participants. So if you're somebody who's been directed to do a Reach Code and you're new to it and you want to accelerate your way through knowing what it is you have to do and all the hoops you have to jump through, we would recommend you come to these events, register, and you can also get the recordings afterwards. Okay, so we already talked about the input opportunities down there below. Let's go over to, actually, is there anything, I'm gonna look at the chat really quick to see if anything's happening. Oh, CATFA. You know what? CATFA is a group that we are trying to get to come and talk at one of these, so thank you for that. I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's other great resources being shared. Somebody's giving, Robert Perry is providing us with a legislative update. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you for sharing with each other, you guys. Really appreciate it. Please continue to do that as we go along and you think of things. So let's go to the next slide here. I'm just going to give you like a really high level overview of the BUILD program. And so this is something, if you are a community interested in building decarbonization in your new residential construction environment, then this is a program you might want to be looking into. So it was Senate Bill 1477 back in 2018 that called on the CPUC to develop 2 programs, BUILD and TECH, and they were both aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions associated with buildings. So in the last couple of years, the CPUC has conducted a building decarbonization proceeding, and then the CEC developed an implementation plan. And long story short, they really recently just launched both aspects of this BUILD program. And so it is a building initiative for low emission development, and it's a residential building decarbonization program designed to provide technical assistance and incentives for new all-electric low-income residential buildings that reduce GHG emissions. So the goal is to deploy near zero emission building technologies to reduce GHG emissions. And they're trying to also ensure no negative bill impact for low-income occupants. And so there's a fact sheet here. There's some links, so you'll all have access to all of that. And so there's all the incentive information, well, really high level incentive information is over there on the right. And really those incentives are built for building owners or developers of low income housing, but that could be a private owner or developer, a public owner or developer. So if your local government is developing its own affordable housing, that might be something for you. Nonprofit organizations and tribal communities as well. They must be in one of the 4 IOU gas service territories. And the types of projects must be residential new construction, alteration of more than 50%, or repurposed commercial buildings for residential housing. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail on that other than to share with you the fact sheet and the materials. There's a lot of information that you can use. I also want you to know that you folks that are eligible also have access to free technical assistance, and those applications are also being accepted right now. Okay. So take a breath, because that was only part of what we want to share with you today. All right, so this is now my moment to introduce our special guest, and we're so fortunate. I have to first say that these guys have been very helpful, even in the weeks coming up to being here, because I've been asking them lots of questions about the Transformative Climate Communities program. And it just so happened that they're here on the day that the NOFA is going to go live. So we're really happy to have Program Analyst Jerry Rivero here with us today, as well as Associate Sarah Newsham. So welcome, you guys. I really appreciate your time. And we today are going to hear all about the Transformative Climate Communities Round 4 grant opportunity. So take it away.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, we'll try to get that all in 15 minutes or less here. So we have a presentation, which Sarah's queuing up. But generally, yeah, thanking you for the opportunity to be here. We're as Angie mentioned, excited because we're doing all the inner workings in the background, getting this launched. So we're really excited. This is a good time to have this conversation. So the timing is great. So yeah, again, my name is Jerry, and Sarah and I will be co-presenting today. And yeah, some of the topics we'll be discussing, we'll give a brief background of the and history of TCC, including a program overview. We will also be discussing application requirements in some detail, including a walkthrough, if there's time, of the mapping tool at the end. And we will also discuss the timeline of round 4, important upcoming dates, and then we'll leave some time for a Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. So yeah, so TCC funds community-driven proposals and is structured to provide existing residents and stakeholders with the tools and resources to drive change. TCC makes significant investments to support the deployment of multiple integrated climate strategies and projects, carried out through strong partnerships at the local level and at the state. To date, the program has invested over $230 million in 26 communities. SGC administers TCC in partnership with the Department of Conservation. To date, we have had 3 rounds, which were all funded under the California Climate Investments, administered by the California Air Resources Board. For round 4, 5, and 6, funding will come from the general fund's climate budget, which we will discuss a little bit further in upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So here we have a couple of an illustration on the right, which points to an awarded project in Ontario. Applicants will select projects that build, again, resilience, improve the livelihoods of residents and stakeholders, and access to key community destinations. These projects must show how they are integrated and how the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The examples here are, as you can see in this map, or maybe not, I can just point to that. We have affordable housing development linked to electric car share, and then tied with parks and community gardens as an example. To the left is a list of climate resilient project types. So it's a pretty extensive list here. We're excited for round 4, where we're including brownfields redevelopment, community microgrids, and indoor air quality projects. Unique from other programs, TCC also funds projects that we call transformative plans or transformative projects, to ensure that the physical infrastructure investments also provide a direct and meaningful benefit to local residents and stakeholders. Next slide, please. So here we have a quick graphic showing some of these transformative projects. So the program has 6 transformative elements that must be included in each proposal to further the transformative potential of the investment, and also to ensure direct and meaningful benefits to existing residents and stakeholders. So we have community engagement, workforce development, and displacement avoidance here as examples. So by ensuring community input throughout implementation, economic benefits to residents through job training, and then avoided displacement of existing residents and businesses, and which build resilience to future climate impacts. Finally, long-term indicator tracking also allows the state to continually assess program outcomes and apply lessons learned. In addition, the leverage requirement boosts the catalytic potential of the TCC investments to sustain community revitalization and equitable development beyond the grant term. Next slide, please. Here we have a graphic that shows the 2 types of grants that we host, implementation grants. So this graphic shows we've had three rounds up to date, and we've showed 8 implementation grants across the state, grants ranging between 10 and 66.5 million, and the number of projects from each grant site ranging from 10 to 20. On the right are images of some of the work that has been done to date. All of the round 3, we're just noting that all of the round 3 implementation grantees were also former planning grantees, which is the next slide. So here we see a map of the 26 planning grants that have been awarded across the state. This is in rural and urban areas for around $100,000 to $200,000 each. On the right is an image of the historic participatory budgeting process in Fresno, a round one implementation grantee. This shows really a powerful planning process that resulted in community prioritized projects. We like to use this image. We encourage you to visit the TCC website for full project profiles of all the implementation grants and grantees, including links to their websites. Next slide. So as we've noted, round four is about to be round four NOFA is about to be released, and we wanted to discuss here in this presentation just quickly some of the tidbits and notes for those that are interested in applying. So here we have a list of who is eligible to apply as lead applicants. So we see here a range of entities can apply, but no single entity can apply on their own without being competitive. Applications must also include a minimum of 2 co-applicants, with a local government being a co-applicant, one of the co-applicants. Next slide, please. So yeah, so here we see the funding available for round four. So the round four guidelines proposes funding for 3 implementation grant awards at $35 million each. And then planning grants at $300,000 each, which is an increase, as we mentioned, from previous years to provide additional planning resources. We'd also like to mention that the general fund's climate budget, which we mentioned earlier, includes an allocation of a total of $420 million over the next 3 years. So that's $115 million for this year, $165 million for next year, and $140 for the following year. So this is tied to some of the work that we're doing with technical assistance, where we're having ongoing technical assistance for folks that perhaps may not make it for this round, but have an opportunity to build kind of their capacities for rounds 5 and 6. And then with that, I think I will hand it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Jerry. So next I'm going to walk through the eligibility criteria for implementation and planning grant project areas briefly. Okay, so for implementation grants, applicants must define a project area that is contiguous and no more than 5 square miles. So it's really focused on neighborhood level investments. At least 51% of the project area must overlap with census tracts that score within the top 25% of Kalenbiro screen, either version 3.0 or 4.0, or be within federally recognized tribal boundaries. And then the remaining 49% or less must meet those same requirements or be designated as a low-income community. And we've updated the TCC mapping tool on our website to combine all of these different types of data into one single tool to help determine eligibility. We also have a story map and a 13-minute video tutorial on our website to help walk through this tool. So for unincorporated communities, the requirements are a little bit different and a little bit more complicated. In round 4, disadvantaged unincorporated communities are now eligible for implementation grants, which they were not previously. The requirement of 51% of the project area being disadvantaged and the rest being disadvantaged or low income is still the same as with the incorporated areas, but the method for being designated as disadvantaged is a little bit different. So over the past 2 years, TCC program staff have developed an investment framework to address the lack of data representation and basic infrastructure access in disadvantaged unincorporated communities that had been previously limiting their eligibility for the program. So there are 4 methods to determine eligibility for an unincorporated area, and an applicant only needs to meet one of these 4 methods. So I'll briefly talk through them, but this is all laid out in a lot of detail in the guidelines and again in the mapping tool. So the first option is to be within a disadvantaged census tract per Kalenbiro screen and be designated as a disadvantaged community by the relevant LAFCO. Second option is to be meet 3 criteria that are all combined into the TCC mapping tool, which is top 25% Kalenbiro screen from a hard to count census block group per the California Hard to Count Index, and then with a sufficient density to make the program a good fit for the program, which is 250 parcels per square mile. And again, that shows up in this tool. The third option is to be within the planning area of a previous planning grant and meet these requirements. And then the final option, and this is the one I really want to emphasize, is that a community can self-identify as a disadvantaged unincorporated community and then justify that with localized data that identifies population characteristics and density defined by neighborhood level assessment. And so we've put a lot of work into this framework to ensure that the funds are reaching their communities that they're meant for, but there are limitations to any data set. And so we recognize that these first three criteria may not accurately capture the reality in your community. And so if you don't meet the previous three, but you believe you should be eligible for the program, we will work with you to figure out what data we can use to justify that eligibility. And then I'll briefly talk about planning grants. So planning grants are, Jerry's covered this, but smaller, $300,000 each, and support planning activities that can be meaningful standalone activities, but also preparing to apply for TCC implementation grants or other state funding in future rounds. And they must address one or more of the TCC transformative elements for a 2-year grant term. And they're focused on building capacity among staff and public agencies. And then we've got a list here of some possible activities that you can review later, but includes preparation of climate action plans, meaningful community engagement, fiscal analyses and studies, project site identification, etc. And one lead applicant and one co-applicant are the minimum requirements. So you have to have at least 2 partners for this grant. And applications with strong and diverse partnerships with CBOs and other stakeholder groups will be favored in the scoring criteria. And at least one of those applicants must be a public agency. And then finally, the planning grant project areas also must be contiguous, but they don't have a maximum project area as the implementation grants do. So you can have a larger area for planning grants. And they must be located in eligible incorporated, tribal, or disadvantaged unincorporated areas. And again, at least 51% of the planning grant must overlap with disadvantaged census tracts per the relevant criteria and the TCC mapping tool. And if there's time, Jerry will walk through this tool and these criteria in a little bit more detail at the end of the presentation. And I'll pass it back to Jerry to talk about technical assistance.
Great. So thank you, Sarah. So yeah, one of the integral components of the TCC program is the technical assistance that's provided. Important to this conversation as well is the application technical assistance, which we'll talk to on the next slide. Sorry. So yeah, if an applicant is awarded, they will again benefit from that application TA. Also, there's implementation TA included, and as we mentioned earlier, evaluation technical assistance to monitor the work across the lifetime of the grant. Awarded applicants are also required again to collect data during the grant. So for round 4, we'd also like to announce that the planning grants will receive technical assistance in the disadvantaged unincorporated communities and tribal communities. Next slide. Please, Sarah, thank you. So yeah, so this is the one, if interested in applying, really application technical assistance is an important resource for potential applicants across the state. So technical assistance includes direct application assistance that supports capacity building, assistance with developing an overall vision, formalizing partnerships, selecting an application components, and then the greenhouse gas reductions calculations. Next slide. So yeah, so let's discuss a little bit of the timeline. As we said, we're in the process of releasing the NOFA. So Sarah has some important dates for y'all to take note of.
Yes, thanks, Jerry. So the final round 4 guidelines were adopted by our council on February 24th. And the application and notice of funding availability will be posted today. It's not up there quite yet, but should be by the end of the day. We will be hosting application workshops this Friday and next Friday for anyone who's interested, which I'll discuss on the next slide. And then here are some key dates in the timeline. So March 25th is the deadline to request application technical assistance. And this is required for all implementation grant applicants to make sure that we're answering questions consistently and all applicants have the support they need to submit competitive applications and have support with some of the quantification items that are a little bit more technical. So if you're interested in applying for an implementation grant for round 4, you need to submit this very simple survey by March 25th so that we can connect you with our third-party technical assistance providers. But you don't need to have made any progress or know what you're doing by that point. It's just an interest survey so we can get you connected. Implementation, and that will also be the deadline for any eligible planning grant applicants who would like third-party technical assistance. So tribal communities and disadvantaged unincorporated communities need to request it by that same date. There will be a pre-proposal on April 22nd for all implementation grant applicants, but this pre-proposal will not influence evaluation of the application or disqualify anyone from continuing to the full application. It's just to help assess where are the additional needs and are applicants on track to submit a complete application by the deadline. For planning grant applicants not receiving technical assistance, they need to submit an interest survey by May 16th, indicating that they plan to apply by the end of the program. And then the final application deadline is July 1st of this year, and then awards will be announced in October and adopted by our council. We have, as I mentioned, 3 workshops coming up. So this Friday is our general workshop for everyone at 10:30. You can register there. Then the following Friday, we'll be having 2 workshops for specific audiences. So disadvantaged unincorporated communities and rural communities will have a workshop, and tribal communities will have another workshop. So all 3 workshops will cover the same basic information. You don't need to attend more than one, but if you are from one of those following 2 communities, you might choose to attend that one instead. And they will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel after the event. So no worries if you can't make these dates. And I put some links to some of our resources here, but all of this information is available on our website, or it will be by the end of the day today. And then we would love to answer any questions you have. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, you guys. Really appreciate you being here. And this is my pep talk because I know that how many of you, local governments and local government partners, are always looking for these opportunities that aren't so siloed, right? You can do multiple things at once. Big dollar and local governments are eligible at least to be part of a team. And so this is why I keep kind of highlighting this and screaming it out and saying this is an opportunity to pay attention to. And you do have some time to apply. It's a complicated one too. The size of it also has meant that this is going to be a lift in order to apply. So that's why we're talking about it now. Now, I want to address the first question that came through the chat. Nick Freeman, he's asking about links and contacts. So those are being shared in the chat. Thank you very much. And actually, Jerry and Sarah, can people contact you directly, or what email address would you like folks to use? Maybe you can drop that in the chat as well. Okay.
You can definitely contact us directly, and I'll put our sort of general inbox in there as well.
Okay. So I'm going to turn again to audience questions in a minute, but I wondered if you both could tell, since this is the 4th round of these awards, tell us more about the various roles that local governments have played in previous rounds of TCC, and what kinds of departments typically lead these projects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Angie. So in previous rounds, most of the lead applicants have been local governments, including cities and councils of governments. Round 1, for example, well, all the rounds, the cities of Fresno, Ontario, Riverside, Stockton, and Oakland have applied. In Los Angeles, the HACLA, the housing agency, has also been a lead applicant. So in our previous rounds, it's mostly been local governments have been the lead applicants. We've had a couple of instances where nonprofits have been the lead applicant. I saw a question come up around nonprofits. The city of, actually the community of Pacoima applied as a nonprofit, and then as an implementation grant, and then planning grants. we have a couple of nonprofits, or actually one nonprofit who is also the lead there. So mostly it has been community or actually local governments. As far as planning grants go, that list expands a little bit more beyond cities and councils. We also have counties and then air quality districts who have been the lead applicants in planning grants. And as far as departments, it's hard to tell the range of departments. It comes from a city agency, so you know, it's hard to see the specific space. I don't know if Sarah has any background on a specific department, but I don't know if we've targeted a specific kind of department that leads these projects.
Not sure, but I think just for implementation grants, at least, any department that would need to be involved in carrying out a large infrastructure project is usually involved in some way in the grant, which just helps, you know, coordinate getting all the pieces together to carry out these projects in the grant term. So whether or not each sub-department is officially listed on the application, it's important to have representation from all the relevant departments.
We've got some, thank you for that. We've got some questions in the chat around eligibility and different kinds of entities and how they can be involved. So Robert Perry is asking about schools, an essential component of all communities, and asking about how TCC can combine with other programs to prioritize schools as community resilience centers, especially in low-income DACs. So I think just maybe a question about how this program intersects with schools.
That's great. That's a great question and a good note to point out. One of our planning grantees, actually, great question, Robert. One of our planning grantees currently for round 3 is the Porterville Unified School District. So we do see that that element as a great component to make these kind of prioritizing these in disadvantaged communities. And Porterville is the lead agency, and they're working. Porterville Unified School District is also working with the city and TCAG, with the Association of Governments out there to kind of work on this project together and in coordination. So yeah, we're definitely identifying schools as potential spaces for this work.
Great. And then Irene Moosin is asking, under Joint Powers Authority, were you anticipating CCAs to be eligible under this category? That's community choice aggregators.
That's a great question, which I don't think I have the answer to, but I could definitely follow up. That's a really good question. Sarah, do you have any? I don't know if this is
I don't, but I know that the list of eligible applicants is a will include but is not limited to list. So I think if there is a lead applicant that demonstrates the capacity to implement this grant and manage the partnerships involved, I think they would most likely be eligible. So we can get back to you on a specific response to that. But yeah, don't feel limited if you didn't see your organization explicitly on that list.
Thanks, Sarah.
Monica Nenez says, who qualifies as a co-applicant with a government agency? Does it have to be a nonprofit?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a nonprofit. We have the list. We had the list up. It could be CBOs, another local government, nonprofit, or we said nonprofits, philanthropic, faith-based organizations. It could be your water district. It doesn't have to necessarily be nonprofit. But the important piece of the work too, which was is kind of the stakeholder engagement. So a lot of the times that nonprofits are included as partners is because we, within that community visioning process, it's important to have an organization that's representative of community voice, because after this is implemented, as we talked about, that community input piece and component, it's going to require that throughout the lifetime of the grant to have that that connection with community. So it's important to have that. That's why we highlight those CBOs as an important partner, but not necessarily the only partner.
Yeah, well, you guys can see how hard Strategic Growth Council is trying to make this flexible and really work for folks on the ground. So we hear it and we appreciate that. Garrett Wong is asking, are cost effectiveness criteria considered, such as size of population and or greenhouse gas reductions and cost per capita or cost per greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, this is not part of the app. This is not considered in the application review. Really, what we look at is the readiness of projects, the collaborative stakeholder structure, your project areas, and all this is supplied in the application process. There is not anything specific to cost effectivity on this one. It's a good question.
I think there's maybe a related question here asking about how the projects will be evaluated by environmental performance.
Great. So yeah, so that's part of the technical assistance in the evaluation TA. So we have third-party partners working on doing these evaluations from application. So you'll have your estimated GHG reductions, and then upon the launch or execution of the grant, we'll start working on who does these evaluations. Like, I'll get to that. So we have UCLA, Luskin Centers doing round 1 and round 2, a couple in round 1 and round 2, all of round 1, round 2, and round 3, they have one site. Then we have University of San Francisco, we have UCR, and then Sacramento State are the evaluators that we currently have. And they're doing these long-term in collaboration with the partners who are collecting the data. The evaluators will kind of help do those evaluation performances annually. And we provide that gets reported to CARB on an annual basis as well.
So I want to go back to the collaborative stakeholder structure. So, and I want to clarify, so that's, that could be somewhat of a heavy lift, but for communities that already have these partnerships, maybe institutionalize a little bit easier. Is that, so collaborative stakeholder structure, that's not a requirement to apply for the planning grant, but it is a requirement of the implementation grant. And is the planning grant intended to help form the collaborative stakeholder structure? Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
And then can you just share a little bit more about what that has looked like in previous rounds of projects?
Yeah. As mentioned, this is a requirement for the implementation grant, not for the planning grant. And we can use the example. There's several good examples, but the example I'm thinking about right now is City of Stockton, who received a planning grant in 2018. And that planning grant supported kind of their development of their Rise Stockton Partner Coalition, which resulted in really a lot of community input and engagement with residents, which in turn created that community vision and their community priorities that they called them, which in turn led to the projects and activities aimed at their now implementation grant. So yeah, it's good to have, for those that already have that established collaborative, you're one step ahead of the game here. It's an important component, as we said, because of that visioning process and piece. But do not be discouraged if you do not have that. That's really encourage you all to use the planning grant as that opportunity to make those connections and to build that out.
And the collaborative stakeholder structure, you'd have to demonstrate that somehow with an agreement or some sort of documentation, right? Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So actually, I think we might have time. I know we talked about possibly doing a demo, and I wonder if you'd be willing, because I want to really raise for folks that this project area eligibility, I don't know, I got my brain stuck on it, because I think if I were in your position, I would really want to, that would be one of the things I would be looking at first. Do I have an eligible project area? And not just do I have one, but do I have one that my community really wants to tackle and is prepared to do something about? And so could you guys, we talked about maybe looking at a county example. How would a county go about just looking at project area eligibility?
Great, this is awesome. I'll share screens here and I'll have the tool up. The tool up, not the tulip. So I will look at, if I were this Riverside County, looking in the Coachella Valley, I'll use the example of, I've typed in the address. This is the tool that's available on the website. So I saw that the link was put in the chat. So thank you very much for putting that link in there. But yeah, I encourage folks to use it. I will give a quick walkthrough. So if I were looking at the community of Mecca, I typed it in right now and it popped up here on this map. The first thing that I would look at is whether it's an unincorporated or unincorporated area. And if you can see here that it definitely falls within the unincorporated. So right now, if I'm a Riverside County looking for a potential project area in the disadvantaged or unincorporated communities, Mecca would be a pretty good candidate. But before we do that, we need to look at the what we have here, the layers, the clusters of parcels of unincorporated areas, and whether that falls in there. So I turn that on, and we can see that it does. The next thing that I'll do, if I'm the County of Riverside, is I will look at the hard to count index, which is another criteria that we use specifically for disadvantaged unincorporated communities. So I'll turn this layer on, and you can see that, yes, it does fall, all three criteria here fall within, or MECA falls within all three criteria. The last thing I will do is do the look at the Cal EnviroScreen score. Again, more than half of the project area needs to fall in a disadvantaged unincorporated community, and we could see here that indeed this area does qualify. So something like this is probably the path that I would take if I were a county. I would start, these top layers are the ones that are, as you talked about earlier, are the ones for folks that are already familiar with the work, and these really apply to like core cities. But these last three layers, and then also the Native American reservations, are the newer kind of elements that we have. I'll show you though, it gets tricky because if we did, I looked up Murata, this is also in the video, looking at the community of Murata Park here, and this is North Stockton. Again, I'll work backwards like I did now, just so we can, identifying that this is an unincorporated community. I turn on the clusters of parcels, and yes, that indeed shows up there. The last thing I'll point to is the hard to count index. And you can see here that because this doesn't fall in the hard to count index, this community would not qualify. Even though if I turn on this Cal EnviroScreen 3.0, it falls within what is the Cal EnviroScreen criteria, but the this index here is the one that would make it qualify because it's an unincorporated community. So showing you how it can get a little tricky with these processes, but again, happy to field any questions as they come in in the email that Sarah put in the chat, I believe, as these come up. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. And the caveat being, even if they didn't pop up through these on the map, looking at these layers, they still have a chance, right? So not to be totally discouraged if they really feel they have a disadvantaged unincorporated area.
That's right. And that's what Sarah leaned on earlier, the localized data or any local data that you may have. We'll definitely look into that as well. So do not feel discouraged if your community does not fall within these immediately.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I do want to point folks to, a minute ago, I put in the chat a link to the e-blast that we had sent out a couple of weeks ago. And in that, the Strategic Growth Council was lovely enough to allow me to share, it was kind of like a informal list. And there's one by cities, the cities that meet the basic requirements for project eligibilities. And so there's just a simple spreadsheet of cities that meet that criteria. And then there's one on counties with the big caveat to say that there are many other ways to qualify, but if you meet basically those overlays of the map, if you meet the sort of the first approach to qualifying, then it tells you how many project areas could qualify, or census tracts that would qualify. And feel free, you guys, to qualify that statement further, but we wanted to make sure that's kind of tucked into that e-blast, but there are links to those spreadsheets. It's first place to go and look, to just be like, hey, am I obviously qualified? That's maybe one thing I would recommend doing. Is there anything that Sarah, Jerry, would you like to kind of leave folks with? If communities are interested in pursuing this opportunity, what would you recommend that they do first to ensure that they have a competitive project?
Yeah, this is a great question. I was gonna leave with that. I think we just shared a bunch of cool maps and cool tools to look at potential project areas, but the first component really would be that community visioning process and connecting with the folks on the ground to make sure that these projects are aligned with that community visioning piece. So I think that's a good place to start, and making sure or identifying, as we said earlier, about that collaborative stakeholder structure, whether that's there, whether that needs some work. I think those are the key important first steps. Again, this is a community-led transformative projects, right? So really leaning on that piece as well, as to have that kind of as the first step to identify, along with these maps, these cool maps, but really being on the ground and connecting with folks, I think is a good first step.
All right, well, we want to really thank you for your time and bringing this information to us and for being open to answering questions offline. Thanks for that email address. And, folks, I have said this is a heavy lift, but how often do you actually have the granting agency providing technical assistance and saying, let us help you do it? So you've got help. I really wish those of you that are going to pursue this the best of luck. Okay, so we're going to move on from here, but thanks again, Jerry and Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay. So in our last few minutes here, you guys gave me some good feedback at the last meeting where the Ask the VPC segment was not as effective, I think, as some other ways that we can spend maybe at the last few minutes of a meeting. And so we're thinking of turning this more into a workshop, meaning what's a topic that we can discuss amongst each other and kind of help each other out a little bit, maybe work out a solution. And in some cases, what can Seek better do to support you in some ways? And so I wanted to raise the issue here of helping each other, which just basically means peer-to-peer sharing and peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. So we have some ways at Seek to encourage folks to ask each other questions or sort of mentor each other, along with the LERN meetings where, of course, we can exchange some level of information. It kind of goes fast. But I want to share two resources, and then I want to encourage folks to share other ideas, and you can raise your hand or you can put something in the chat, or other resources that you feel are really important for local government and local energy and climate practitioners to be able to talk to each other when they need to, and try to grab support or templates or advice, success stories, lessons learned. One way that we have hoped to do that is through our LinkedIn group. And so we've got the Seek LinkedIn peer-to-peer network, and I post on there all the time like it's my job, and it is. So I have I'm posting interesting content, I think, and it looks like folks are looking at it, and that's super cool. I also hope that folks will also post there as well. So the intention for that wasn't just to be sort of a sharing of information at you, but between you. And I want to encourage folks to use this resource more. And maybe, maybe folks are shy, but just know that the intention of it is that if you have a question that you want to raise for folks that are your peers and maybe potentially doing work like what you're doing, that we would encourage you to post it here. And I'll just give you an example. In the last month, a local government practitioner reached out to us asking for an example of how you might document real property for match requirements for an EV grant. So that's just like a short synopsis, and I won't out this person, but we were able to help her and get her to the right place. But and one way to do that is if you're looking for how other local governments might have addressed an issue like that, you could raise it here and folks can share whatever resources or point you to the right direction. I'll help if I can, but oftentimes you are each other's best resource. Some of you are doing very aligned work. Okay, so I wanted to share that and just encourage you to do it. Don't be shy. We hope to see more conversations happening there between each other. The other thing that we have built is the TA directory, so technical assistance directory, and it's still sort of in the newish stage, but what we have done is built out this directory on our website that if you are interested in a specific topic, you could try to find somebody that already has the ability to help. So it's either organizations that are somehow resourced to already provide technical assistance on a topic, or peer knowledge providers, meaning somebody in a local government or a practitioner doing this work who has offered to share their knowledge and experience on a particular topic. And so first of all, you can look there and see if somebody's available to answer any specific questions on a topic. And secondly, if you want to be on that list, if you are willing to be contacted by other local governments, maybe you have a killer reach code, maybe you've done a really good job with developing a financing program, maybe you have a really great multifamily energy efficiency program. If you want to be the go-to where other local governments can, you've worked through the details, you know how to operate something that others would benefit from, please join the directory. And there's a button on there that you can actually use to join. So I'm going to stop there and ask for anybody to raise questions or share something in the chat. If you have other resources you want to share or questions about this or ideas about what Seek can do to make this process better. I'm looking at the chat. I didn't see anybody chatting me anything. Is there any raised hands? Let's see. Or am I just, have I finally reached the brim of your mental capacity for 1 hour of information? Well, anyways, it's a good opportunity for us to share with you what we're doing and how we're trying to help. If you ever have ideas about ways that we could do a better job of encouraging folks to help each other, let us know. You can always ask questions to me directly or a specific technical assistance request to me if you want to email me at ahacker, and actually that's oldcivicwell.org. Okay. Well, thanks all for bearing with me through that. I do have one last thing to do here. If you go to the next slide. That's just a reminder of save the date, September 21st, SEEK Forum. It's coming in San Diego. So I have one last thing to do, and that's a poll. We have our next meeting is going to be April 12th. We have a few a few irons in the fire, some organizations that are interested in presenting, and we're just trying to plot out the rest of the, a few months down the line, speakers and things. And so, Gabby, could you launch that poll? I want to find out from you guys which of these you're interested in hearing more about at future learns. And so you could check as many of those as you like. We're just interested to hear what kinds of stuff you want to hear more about. And if you have ideas for other speakers, other programs you want to hear about, you can throw them in the chat or you can contact me directly. All right, so go ahead and take another couple of seconds just to fill this form or this poll out. And actually, this reminds me, I forgot to mention on my opportunity roundtable, one of my links was to an upcoming EPIC grant. So CEC EPIC program has a solicitation coming out around storage, so demonstration projects for storage. So that's coming out in April. We'll have a chance to talk about that next month. But I actually would love to have somebody from EPIC come and speak to us as well. All right, you can close the poll and let's see how it turned out. Yeah, EPIC, I agree. EPIC, okay, so there's some interest on all of it. Yeah, great. This is helpful. Well, I don't see anything else in the chat. Let's see, still focus on schools, near-term concrete action. Perhaps a dialogue can be started in the LinkedIn group. Robert, yay, please start that in the LinkedIn group. That would make my day. Thank you so much. All right, well, I'm going to then leave it here. Thanks again to our speakers. Thanks again to all of you for being here with us today. Please join us next time, April 12th, and tell a friend because we would love to see this continue to grow. Until next time, have a great month.